This is very topical. So I went looking for great seasons that didn't end with Stanley Cups. And I thought, there was that season that the Philadelphia Flyers set records, and they were great. They finished at 48, 12, and 20, which is a 116-point season, which would be the equivalent of like about 124 at today's rate. Pretty fantastic year, right? And everything looked great. Coach Pat Quinn, Captain Mel Bridgman. This is a big, tough team. Now, they're not quite Broad Street bullies like they were 5 years before, but they're still plenty tough. That being said, this season would end in a lot of controversy. And, the funny thing is that if this happened now, I shudder to think. And the funny thing is, this is back in 1980. This is 79-80. This is 39 years ago that this takes place. 39 years since then. And now we're talking like, oh, officiating's never been worse than it is right now. This team went undefeated from October 14th to January 6th. 35 games without recording a loss. Now, the interesting thing is they had 15 shorthanded goals that year, which was 4 better than the Edmonton Oilers. The Edmonton Oilers would reinvent shorthanded and manipulating power plays and making it so that they have more ice. And the NHL would try to get rid of the offsetting rules to allow more free ice for the Oilers. But this is before we reach that critical point. This is where the Flyers are the best team in the league. They're the best team in the league by a wide margin. And it shows. They have 327 goals for. That's one behind the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens, of course, having been a dynasty in the late 70s. Fantastic Hall of Fame studded roster. December 1st through 20th, they tied 6 out of 9. So that's one of those spots where you can look and say, by today's standard, they likely would have lost a couple in overtime. They likely would have won a few in overtime. They would have padded their points a little bit. And this undefeated streak would be undefeated in regulation, right? October 13th, they lost, before this winning streak started, 9-2 to the Atlanta Flames. And then at the end of the winning streak, the end of the undefeated streak, January 7th, they lost 7-1 to the Minnesota North Stars. So the bookends on this are games against teams that have moved since then. That's how long ago this was, and that's how interesting this is. March 12th through 25th, so towards the end of the season, easy for me to say, right? They went 0-4-3. They were winless in 7, and they only won 3 of their last 13 games going to the playoffs. Again, would not have taken very much for them to end up with 50-plus wins, but clearly pacing themselves going into the playoffs. In said playoffs, they swept the Oilers in the first round in 3. And the Oilers learned a lot from that series, and the Flyers would teach some lessons elsewhere as well. They taught a lesson in round 2 against the Rangers with a series of only 5 games. So in 8 games, they've now qualified for the semifinals where they meet the Minnesota North Stars. They win that series in 5 as well to face the New York Islanders, who they finished 25 points ahead of in the regular season. In that finals, they lost it in 6. And that's where people remember it as having started. The New York Islanders start their dynasty with a win in 1980. And yet, controversy? Oh, you betcha. There's an offside goal. Butch Goring is 100% completely. That's an offside goal. Shouldn't have counted, and it did. And it's a goal by Dwayne Sutter that puts them ahead 2-1. And it was clearly offside, and you can even see on the replay at least one Philadelphia Flyer team player putting his hand up like that's offside, right? Nothing. And this is in New York, so there weren't like a chorus of boos or anything. If that had happened in Philly, they'd still be on fire. But then in overtime, you could argue that the Bobby Nystrom goal was offside as well. So Stanley Cup winning goal by Bob Nystrom, and Flyers fans will tell you to this day, could have been offside. At the very least, you could argue one way or the other. At the very least, with today's technology, this requires a nice long look before they're allowed to celebrate. But this goal wouldn't have counted, and you could make the argument. The Flyers would have won that Game 6, would have gone home for Game 7. They had won 2 out of 3 at home. The Islanders won all 3 of their home games. And a Game 7 in Philly, 116 points with that crowd and the Spectrum. Flyers fans will tell you they would have won that in 7. So was Nystrom's goal offside? Maybe. Should they have been in overtime at all because Dwayne Sutter's goal was on an offside play? That's a definite offside play. Now, whether or not the Islanders would have found a way to come back and tie it anyways, because when you disallow a goal or you allow a goal, you change the whole flow of the game, and the other team has the option to respond. But it is the most controversial goal in playoff history. 100% in my eyes. Because the Stanley Cup final, it's the deciding game, and it kind of happened twice. So for Buffalo fans to say, wait a minute, no, I would argue that a clear offside, that to me is the most controversial. The Dallas one, I'll give you, is the second most controversial goal in Stanley Cup playoffs history. And if Twitter, Instagram, and all those other wonderful things had existed back in '99, that would have been quite the scenario. Now, when you look at this Flyers roster, their leading scorer was Ken Linsman, 22 goals, 57 assists, 79 points. So less than 80 points. But this is when we're starting to see a lot of goals get scored. 27 goals tells you there's a lot of guys on this team that could score. Reggie Leach, 50 goals, 26 assists, 76 points. Brian Propp, 34 goals, 41 assists for 75 points. 2 Hall of Famers on the roster, starting with Bill Barber, 40 goals, 32 assists for him. Bobby Clark, 12 goals, 57 assists for him. In net, they had Pete Peters, who was 29, 5, and 5. 2.73 goals against, 898 save percentage. Keep in mind, save percentages back then were much lower than what they are now. Phil Muir, 18, 7, and 15 record. Isn't that a strange stat line? 15 ties, 18 wins, 7 losses. Strange. 3.58 goals against and an 875 save percentage. It was quite the goaltending tandem they had there. But Peters, I'll say, straight up, was probably the better goaltender. Peters had some amazing seasons. Is not widely remembered as being just how good he was. So eventually there will be a Pete Peters video. Whether I wear Flyers or Bruins for that one, I haven't decided yet. There were 7 players on this team with 100 or more penalty minutes. So yeah, they were not quite the Broad Street Bullies of the mid-70s, but they could still go. And the New York Islanders might be the only team back in the late 70s, early 80s that could match up with them toughness for toughness. Bobby Nystrom, the Sutters, and whatnot. They had 6 20-goal scorers. So this was a team that had depth. They could score. They had a solid blue line. And again, they were tough as nails. It's a season that we remember only for the 35-game undefeated streak at this stage. But really, in all honesty, if this had happened now, all that would be remembered is these guys got robbed of their 3rd Stanley Cup. So, and Islander fans will say, hey, there's no guarantee they would have won Game 7. There's no guarantee we wouldn't have won Game 6, regardless of what happened there, because it would have changed the flow of the game. I agree. And there's the argument as well of kind of painting this over because the Islanders would go on to win cups in 81, 82, 83 without any closeness to those series. That being said, the Flyers in 1980 probably got robbed. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. If you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.